telling the whole stadium how Liberty...
Hi guys, happy Friday Eve. How is everybody doing? Druid, I didn't ask you if that little bit of volume nudge helped any. Thank you, ma'am. Let's see. Let me get all my stuffs here recombobulated. So it's Thursday, the 15th day of 2026. And boy, does it just get better and better, right? Is anybody caught up in that Verizon mess yesterday? It seemed like it was primarily East Coast. Oh, okay. So Druid says, still pretty high on the volume, but it's okay. Okay. I think I have a lot of my volume maxed out, so I'm afraid of creating, like gritty sound for anybody. So it'll work itself out, right? Sometimes it does. Yeah, the technology issues, you guys. The Verizon thing yesterday, I'll be honest, when I realized it was happening, I think my husband had texted me and he said, is your phone working? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then I realized, I was like, oh no, wait a minute. It says emergency calls only. That's weird. And he's like, oh, okay. You paid the bill, right? Yes, I paid the bill. So, I Googled and was like, oh, so here's what's going on. That was crazy, you guys. If you're elsewhere in the country or you're not in the US, Verizon is like our biggest carrier here in the US. I've been a Verizon customer forever. Um, Usually these things aren't a problem, but more recently they have been. So, it's, I think people's initial reaction was like, oh my gosh, we've been hacked. And they're saying that's not what it was. But in reality, it's like as all of these technology things like consolidate and, they're very incestuous. That's the best way to put it, like if one thing goes down, there's so many other things that are dependent on all that stuff. So anyway, I'm glad to be back today. I'm glad to be back online. I'm glad to be able to call and text people. Although, I don't know that my phone is really 100% back. I can't get 5G, and that could be an issue with like my location. So I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, today, knocking on wood, I don't think there's anything like it totally insane happening today. In any event, like yeah, let's hope for a calm, smooth Friday and weekend. We're halfway through Thursday. Isn't that terrible? You kind of have to laugh to keep from crying, you guys. I mean, it's absurd. Anyway, I won't dwell on current events. Um, yeah, so on Tuesday, Jill and I did not do quilt nerding. She wasn't feeling well. And we just decided it was probably good, just to take a night off. And we'll be back next Tuesday for our regular Book Talk Tuesday. But I almost forgot. We've got a Stitch and Glitch on Saturday. So if you've never joined us for a Stitch and Glitch, and you're available on Saturday, I know lots of people get things done on Saturday, but if you're available, you want to just hang out, do some stitching, do some glitching. It's a good time. It's silly. We often go off on crazy tangents, and even though I always bring sewing to my desk, I never get any done. So anyway, it's a lot of fun, and if you're feeling stressed out, come join us. It's just a little bit of lighthearted silliness on a Saturday. We get started at 2 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube, Quilt Nerding. Just look for it. You can also look us up on Instagram, and Jill always has like the calendar and the links and stuff always posted. So Quilt Nerding. So yeah, I hope you'll join us, and we're just gonna hang out. Sometimes we go short, sometimes we go long. But yeah, it's a good time, and we both always like feel better after we've connected with our friends. So I hope you'll join us. So today, I thought all week, what am I going to do today? And oh, thank you, Druid. Thanks for posting that. Druid just posted the link to Quilt Nerding on YouTube. So if you don't follow us, go over there, follow us, like, share, all that stuff. So I thought last night, I was like, I still didn't have something picked last night, and I was like, oh, I haven't been researching anything hardcore all year, all 15 days of it. So you guys love the Quilters newsletter magazines. I get people ask me all the time, are you doing Quilters newsletter magazines? Are you looking at those? And so based on that, and the fact that back on Quilt Nerd, when Mary Fonz was doing that, she always got lots of people that loved Quilters newsletter magazine. So I shut my eyes and I dipped in. And I did choose I have little magazine files. I did choose the magazine file that's got the early ones. So this one we're going to look at today is number 24, which happens to be October 1971. So older than me. I'm sorry for you guys that are also older than me and you're like, shut up, cake. But yeah, this is more than 50 years old. Like, what, 55 years old? 55 years old. And there's some good stuff in here. So, hey, Robin. Yeah. Yeah, Stitch and Glitch, if nothing else, you'll leave hungry because inevitably we devolve into talking about food. And I always say, I want to get a chicken sandwich or something before Stitch and Glitch. So, and I never managed to. So, anyway, so I thought we would look at this. And, speaking of technology issues, I have a printer that, if you guys are familiar with that old movie Office Space, which, so many memes came out of that movie. But there's a scene where their printer fax machine thing is they're just beating it with a baseball bat out back. Dude, I'm so ready to do that with this printer. Let me be clear, Epson, your Eco Tank ET 2720 is hot garbage. I know I don't have the widest reach, but should anyone want to take that snippet and let Epson know, it is the garbagiest printer ever. I can't get it to connect to my computer. I have done all the drivers, all the stuff. Long story short, I was trying to scan this so it was nice and clean. Because you guys know I can't take pictures. So I always cut stuff off. It's always like cockeyed. Anyway, but so I had to take pictures. Fingers crossed we'll get this scanner situation taken care of, because I would like to start scanning these and making them look a little better than my horrible picture taking abilities. But anyway, so we're going to look through this. I haven't read ahead, but I did eyeball a few interesting things that I'll point out. And then we've only got 2 more pages of English quilting to do. And literally it's the last chapter. It's chapter 4, 2 pages long. So, and then we'll look at all the pictures. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, screen up here. Okay, so as I said, number 24, 1971. This is the October issue. I'm not exactly sure when they started putting the month on the front, because the reason I know this is October is right inside the front page. It says when it was published. But by 1973, definitely, they had stopped putting, you no longer numbered them on the front. They put the month. I'm guessing it was sometime probably in 1972 when they started doing that, because, again, this is October. So here on the front cover, you see it says The Bible Quilt by Bertha Stenge. Bertha Stenge, have not talked about her a whole lot. I have not done a whole lot of research on her, but I have a colleague who has done a lot of research on her and done reproductions of her quilts, I believe. She's a colleague through American Quilt Study Group. She's also done the same thing with Florence Pito, and she's done some like exact replicas of Florence Pito stuff, and her quilts are lovely. And I think the Bertha Stenge quilt that and it's not shown in here, I'll try to pull it up. It's the Quilting Party. You guys might be familiar with that picture. I think it's a painting. I don't know that it has an exact attribution, but it's out there. You know what? While I'm sitting here, let's just find it while I'm talking, because you should know it as soon as you see it, and if you don't, this is a good new thing for you to know. Let's see. So let's do Bertha, and I think this might be at the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm not sure. So Bertha Stenge Quilting Party. Images. Here it is. So I'm just gonna open the picture in a new tab so we could just look at that. Oh, and of course I can't zoom in. But as you can see, this is a terrible image because I know you can't see this very well. It's so small, but this is the Quilting Party. And it's like Victorian era kind of quilting party. And again, I think it's a painting. So yeah, but that's what it looks like. And just a quick look at all this Bertha Stenge stuff. Here she is. This is a PBS thing. Interesting. Okay. Chicago's Quilting Queen. That's interesting. I'm guessing Chicago's Quilting Queen was just her title. So this isn't just Quilter's Newsletter that's calling her that, I guess. Anyway, so She made a lot of quilts, and they're interesting quilts. They're not, um, the standard pieced stuff. They're creative. And the one I love the most is called the quilt. I think it's called Quilt Show. I might be dreaming that up, but anyway, it's a bunch of women holding a quilt in each little block. Each block has a woman holding a quilt, and the little blocks are very tiny compared to, you know, the full quilt size, and I think they're just fabulous. It's very very modern looking. So, what we see here on the front, it says the Bible quilt by Bertha Stenge, and right here inside, Bonnie Lehman says, on the cover, one block from the Bible quilt by Bertha Stenge. This quilt depicts 12 biblical scenes. Pattern number 1503 for this quilt was published by the Ladies' Home Journal. Whether or not this pattern is still available from the journal, Quilter's Newsletter has not been able to learn. So, and you know what? I don't think it's the same thing, but it just occurred to me and I haven't looked at it. In Dr. Dunton's collection, he has some kind of Bible quilt thing that I found, and I took pictures of it. It's like literally big, life-size sheets. You don't have to scale things up. They're literally like the full size. And I know it's from one of the ladies' magazines, but I don't remember the year. I don't know if it's this one. It very well could be. I had it, on my list to research, and I just haven't gotten to it. So I may have solved my question, but I don't know. So after I get off here, I'll have to go and look. So anyway, this is interesting because this is just, she does these pictorial things, and a lot of her quilts are have some pictorial element, whether it's the medallion in the center like the quilting party, or this one is 12. I'm looking to see. I don't know that the full quilt is depicted in here. It's not, but this one I imagine is 12 blocks depicting, and this is obviously Noah's Ark happening here. So and look at the fabric she uses. She's got this texture fabric for the giraffe, and Noah's wife has got like a checked gown or robe on, and Noah's got stripes on his robe. So she does some pretty cool stuff, I have to say. So this is on my okay. So we'll go ahead and skip this. This is just the inside cover. What's new in quilting? Won't go over this either, but look at this. This cute little schoolhouse. So this is to celebrate its 50th anniversary. McCall's Needlework and Crafts magazine has been sending around a collection of its needlework to various stores throughout the country. The May D&F store in Denver, Colorado recently presented this exhibit. Among the items on display was the schoolhouse quilt at the right, photographed by Jane Younger. This pattern is shown in their fall-winter 1970 to 71 issue. So I guess it would have been like a year prior this was shown. So, there's a little tip for anybody who was going to research some schoolhouses. This was in McCall's 50th anniversary. Okay, so let us get to Bertha. And, as I mentioned, a colleague who's researching, also my dear friend and mentor, Mary Kay Waldvogel, is a Bertha Stenge aficionado, and she has done a lot of research on Bertha Stenge. The Quilting Queen of Chicago isn't just a title. A lot of her stuff is still in Chicago. And again, I think it's at the Art Institute of Chicago. So what you see here, before I start reading, is this quilt, and it's kind of cut in half. Imagine this bottom part, flip it up, and you've got the full quilt. I've seen this quilt, and currently the International Quilt Museum in Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, has this quilt in their collection. But what they say about this is one half of gazelle is shown here. And so these are gazelles. The beauty and perfection of the applique and trapunto work cannot be done justice in a small black and white photograph. And this is interesting. It says price $450. And that is because in 1971, a bunch of Bertha's quilts had been um, sold and I guess acquired by different entities and people. Um, this one, let's see. Yeah, this one's just priced at 450. And this is interesting because I would be so curious to know. Um, I don't think it went from this. So this woman, Mrs. Fuchsman, was the person selling these, and I'll get into the reading in a minute, but she had this quilt back in 1971 and she was selling it for $450. Where did it go? This is very interesting. Like, what is the provenance? Who did she sell it to? Because she didn't keep it until the 90s or probably the early 2000s when the IQM got it. So it's really interesting, some of these really famous quilts, to know, where were they? What major collector had them? And I'm quite certain a major collector had it. So let me go ahead and start reading, and you can look at Gazelle. We'll zoom in here. So the color of it, oh gosh, I am blanking on the colors. I believe this backing is kind of like a creamy color, and I think it's sateen. And if I remember correctly, these are kind of like pastels, I think. It's maybe like pinks, and I think some of this in here. I'm gonna have to dig up the picture, you guys. I didn't look. I do have pictures I took of it, so at the IQM. So to dig that up. But let's start reading this. So it is titled Bertha Stenge, the Quilting Queen of Chicago. There was a great deal of excitement among quilt lovers when Prudence Fuchsman, daughter of Bertha Stenge, okay, I didn't know she was Bertha's daughter. Okay, so Bertha Stenge's daughter recently announced that some of her mother's famous quilts were for sale. These quilts are all art objects of historical interest and should be much sought after by collectors who can afford them. Mrs. Stenge might be considered the Michelangelo of the quilt world. She certainly was one of the finest quilt makers America ever produced, and she received much praise for her work during her lifetime. Now, this quilt, if I remember correctly, we're not sure, and by we, I mean like quilt researchers, quilt scholars. I think we're not sure whether this was like a published pattern that she kind of did something with, or if she was influenced by things of the time, or if she designed this completely out of her own imagination, if I'm remembering that correctly. This is interesting. She didn't begin quilting until she was about 40 years old. So 40, that's I mean, we're certainly not in Grandma Moses territory, but for somebody who had ended up with such a legacy, that's interesting that she started quilting when she was 40. Yet she received first prizes at the 1936 Canadian National Exhibition, 1940 New York World's Fair, an award of $1,100 from Women's Day National Needlework Exhibition. I mean, again, that's big money for that time period. And dozens of blue ribbons at state and county fairs. During the 1940s, her quilts were exhibited at the University of California Art Gallery and the Art Institute of Chicago. The Art Institute just bought a quilt, Toby Lill, from Mrs. Fuchsman. Krista Meyer, the Institute's curator of textiles, says, "This acquisition, which is a superb example of 20th century quilting, completes the Institute's extensive quilt collection." Mrs. Stenge made most of her quilts with intricate applique and trapunto. She considered her work the hobby of a peaceful solitude and art expression. She once told a reporter, "The two things you need most in making applique quilts are plenty of patience and a warm iron." I love that. Let's go on to, let's see, we'll make that small. Go on to the next page because there's another quilt here. Come on now. Okay. Oh, I skipped something. All right, there we go. It's not a super great image, but you can see, despite the fact this is blurry, this is actually an angel. To me, it looks like an eagle, but I'm pretty sure this is an angel, or maybe not. You know what? There's a flag here. This is American flag. Looks like George Washington. I don't know who this is, but also we've got Santa, and this is called the American Holiday Quilt. Okay. This is what the caption says. American Holiday Quilt. Each block represents a major holiday. Okay, this is why. Each block represents a major holiday. The trapunto in the border depicts musical notes. Musical notes. So I think that's probably, is that this here? Because this looks like probably some grid quilting. So this, maybe this here. Musical notes which can actually be played. So she copied these musical notes from an actual, I guess, actual sheet music. The notes are portions of Home Sweet Home, Yankee Doodle, Jingle Bells, and the Star Spangled Banner. So, okay. Again, I don't know what some of these things are. Flag Day, maybe? 4th of July, perhaps? I don't know. I'm guessing President's Day. This looks like it might be a witch. So that could be Halloween, I guess. I really can't tell what some of these other things are. Looks like a person in bed. Who knows? Have to look and see if we can find this one and see more about it. Okay, so the Stenge quilts listed below are for sale by Mrs. Fuchsman. And I had no idea that was her daughter. I guess I knew she had at least one child. She probably had a number of kids, but I'd never heard her name. So Prudence. So that's a lovely name. Okay, so prices were arrived at after appraisal by an art gallery. So again, 1971. So the Lotus, 1934, $400. This quilt is red, green, and white and was featured in the Ladies' Home Journal in the 1940s. It is inspired by an Egyptian frieze. Gazelle, 1935, which is what we just looked at, $450. So we've got some color here. Off-white and Dubonnet. I don't even know what color that is. This quilt contains the beginning of Mrs. Stenge's trapunto work. So it looks like 1935 is when she was getting started with trapunto. Tiger Lily. Okay, Tiger Lily, 1940, $1,000. So you see the prices are going up here. These earlier quilts are, oh gosh, I see the price on this one. Holy moly. So the price on this is much lower. You know, from 1935 on, she's getting into the thousands, or 1940 on, she's getting into the thousands. So Tiger Lily, $1,000. This quilt is in bright yellow, green, and paisley against off-white and won a blue ribbon for the most unusual quilt at the 1941 Kentucky State Fair. Feathered Star, 1934. Oh, that's 34. $1,000. A gorgeous example of quilting, which is done in yellow and white. Star of Constantine says that was before 1937, $1,000. This work contains more than 7,200 pieces and 500 colors and was inspired by a Byzantine plate in a museum. 500 colors, so I'm guessing there's a lot of different fabric in that one. Victory Quilt, 1942, $3,500. That's a lot of money in 1971, y'all. This quilt was a remembrance of Mrs. Stenge's first visit to Washington, as well as a war commemorative, and was pictured in the March 1943 Women's Day. San Francisco Fair, 1939, $1,000. American Holiday Quilt, so this. American Holiday Quilt, $4,000. This quilt is red, white, and blue and took 2 years to make. And finally, Life's Flower Basket. This is the last quilt Mrs. Stenge made, and it is signed and dated. $5,000. So, you know, just thinking about, and, you know, I can't do the, you know, these monetary conversions in my head. You have to go to one of those adjusted for inflation monetary converters. But my guess is $5,000 in 1971 is at least $10,000 today or more. So, yeah, you can imagine these quilts are for sure worth a lot of money now, and they're in museums. You know, not to say that there aren't some quilts out there that might be privately owned, but I would say probably most of this stuff is in museums. Okay, so this is Tiger Lily. by Bertha Stenge, in which trapunto is used to accentuate the applique designs. So I think this is all trapunto in here. These little curly Q kind of things. I get they kind of look like, I mean, I guess tiger lily, right? This is like a flower, but these almost remind me of like wheat sheaths or something. Although I guess they're meant to be maybe just leaves. I don't know. At first glance, I thought these things looked like Christmas trees. Um, or maybe we were looking at like an oak leaf and reel situation, but this is tiger lily. And I'm certain I've seen a picture of this before. So they go on to sort of finalize this. 3 of the quilts listed on page 5 are pictured in these pages, so we've looked at them. Anyone interested in further information about the sale of these quilts may write to Mrs. Prudence Fuchsman, and it gives her address in Chicago, Illinois. And I love the fact that I mean, today, could you imagine just putting and of course phone number's not here, but her address is. Can you imagine just putting your address out there in a magazine? You know, I mean, I worry about things. Oh my gosh. I will read Druid's comments in a second. So yeah, but in these old magazines and even in books, again, some of my friends and colleagues have written books like in the 90s, and even then, you could flip to the like about the author page and it would have their address. And I'm like, well, if somebody wants to come murder you, they know where you are now. I guess we didn't think about things back then, right? Like that wasn't on people's minds. Today, it's like, I don't want anybody to know where I live. They're going to come get me. So, yowza. This is what Druid found. $5,000 in 1971 has the same buying power as approximately $40,000 to $40,015 today, early 2026. Due to inflation, meaning prices are about 8 times higher, with an average annual inflation rate around 3.8 to 3.9% over the past 55 years. Wow. And in 1971, we were on the precipice of a gas crisis. Although I think 71 we're still in Vietnam, right? So I don't know kind of what's happening with the economy then. So I may be off a little bit on when inflation is happening in the past, but still, wow. So yeah, I mean, it really doesn't surprise me that her quilts would be worth that much money. So, all right, let's move it on. So this one, I'll read this, but let me zoom in on the pictures here. So this is called Canadian Quilting Capers by Mary M. Conroy. The 1971 Canadian National Exhibition was a glorious riot of color, confusion, and sound. Confusion. A quiet oasis of calm and beauty was the pavilion which housed the homecraft competition winners. Okay, so I guess the National Exhibition is like the World's Fair kind of environment. The Canadian National Exhibition, affectionately known as the EX to Canadians, is the oldest and largest fair in Canada. The first fair was held in 1878 at Toronto, Ontario, where it is still held. The competition in quilting is open to anyone in the world, and many quilters other than Canadian have won prizes over the years. Among these are well-known American quilters. The late Florence Pito and Mrs. I. Danner. And if I remember correctly, her first name is like, the I stands for like Iotis or something. It's an odd name. But she's very no, wait a minute. It's Scioto Danner. I don't know why it says Mrs. I. Danner. In any event, Florence Pito and Scioto Danner, they're big names. I didn't know that Florence Pito won anything from this fair. So this year, however, all the awards went to Canadian quilters. Interest in the quilts by spectators was very high, although the number of entries was an unusually low 31. Perhaps next year, the flood of entries from Quilters newsletter readers will raise the number back up again. The reputation for high standards of workmanship may keep some good quilters from entering. Standards are high. The needlework on the quilts this year was exquisite. The quilts awarded prizes, however, tended very much to traditional designs. Among the winners were a log cabin, a lone star, and a grandmother's flower garden. The applique quilts were also fairly well-known patterns, and at least one case had been done from a quilt. So that's interesting. Really high standards, but they're okay with a quilt. A kit quilt. I think if you're specifically looking for, um, the skill and not so much like design capability, then that makes sense. But the only really original design was the ladies of the Burlington Senior Citizens Club. This was an appliqued and embroidered crest of the city of Burlington on a striking blue background, against which the very fine quilting showed up clearly. So I think that's this right here, this crest. Not in the quilt competition, but tucked away in a display booth, was an unusual quilt made by Mrs. S. Johnson of Malton, Ontario. Mrs. Johnson placed blown-up photographs of the old homesteads and scenes of life in the village of Malton under squares of white material and traced the detail, which she painted with fabric paint. One of the scenes showed a group of women at work at the quilting frame. Unity was given to the quilt through the use in each block of predominantly red and green tones. Anyone wishing to enter next year's competition should write to, and it gives the name of a person, and it's the women's division of the national exhibition. So let's see. This is funny. For a copy of the prize list and rules and regulations for 1972. A word of caution. Check carefully through the entire list. At least one category for quilts is on a different page than all the others. So what we see here, we've got Red Poppy, Marie McCain, third prize, senior citizens class. Orange Blossom, Ruth Schmidt, first prize, applique division. The Lone Star by Eva Udi, a motif cut from chintz was applique to the four corners, a technique popular in the 19th century. So this is broderie purse right here. So that little flower was cut out. And then the crest by the Burlington Senior Citizens Club, second prize. Very interesting. We don't hear as much about Canadian quilters, I don't think. Although I have a couple books about Canadian quilts. I'll have to pull those out sometime. Okay, so let's see. Druid has a little more intel. Despite U.S. drawdowns, fighting continued. Okay, yeah. Paris Peace Accords in January 73. Yeah, that's what I thought. I remember 73 being like in my baby book. My mother wrote about Vietnam and Watergate. Okay, up next, we have the Delectable Mountains. Oh, goodness. What happened here? Okay, so we have Delectable Mountains. Now, this is an interesting pattern because Dr. Dunton, and I can drag my boy Dr. Dunton into any conversation. He was really enamored with this pattern, and he started this. So if you know about Dr. Dunton, you know what I'm about to say, but his book really focused on Baltimore album quilts, so things with a lot of applique. He really loved those quilts the most, although after he published that book, he wrote that book, he decided to start writing a book about specifically patchwork and piecing. It never got published, but I have a copy of it. I've read it, and I have a copy of it from the Baltimore Museum of Art collection, where his collection resides. And he started with Delectable Mountains as this starting point for piecing. And I still don't understand. Like, he kind of starts off with like this kind of thing. And then he shows what happens if you like kind of flip some of the, how when you flip some of the triangles, the half square triangles, like how different things happen. It's very odd. And, I was like, if you want to pull down, distill down this idea of where do patterns come from, like the building blocks of patterns, I feel like you'd start with a half square triangle because that is essentially what you're looking at here. You're looking at big half square triangles, and then you're looking at the little half square triangles. So anyway, It's a very odd thing that he did. But in any event, this design was also the first prize winner in the Century of Progress um, contest that was part of the Sears Century of Progress contest that was part of the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago. Um, and so it was a green and white quilt, looked pretty much like this. um, and it was gifted to the Roosevelts, to Mrs. Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt. There's pictures of this happening, this sort of ceremonial, like handing her the quilt and she's looking at the quilt. And of course, you've heard me say this before, the quilt disappeared into the black hole of the White House. One can assume that the Roosevelts probably didn't necessarily care about it too much. Eleanor Roosevelt was a knitter, not a quilter. Um, I know she cared a lot about women's work. She, etc. But I still think like the quilt was just like whatever. And so to this day, it has not been found. Nobody knows where it is. We joke on quilt nerding that it is probably like in the crap closet of the White House. But something tells me all the crap closets at the White House have been cleared out over the decades. So I suspect, like for real, that it was just one of those things, like perhaps when the Roosevelts left, or maybe even later presidents, when they cleared out of the White House, somebody saw this quilt and was like, that's pretty. And nobody wanted it. And so they took it. And so, hopefully it's out there somewhere in somebody's, collection. Maybe they don't realize what it is. It would have a label on the back of it that specific to the Sears contest. The other interesting thing about that quilt is the woman who entered it, I'm blanking on her name right now. She actually did make the quilt. And this is the part that she claims she designed it. But she had sort of cottage industry situation going on where some other women pieced and quilted the quilt, if I remember correctly. So there was all of this controversy about that, and I've seen some letters. There's a letter, the woman I think who was primarily responsible for making the quilt, her daughter had written letters about this, and at the time she just kind of threw up her hands and was like, what am I going to do? Today, you better believe that the woman that entered this quilt would have been like getting a beat down from the lady who actually made it. But, that's just not the way things were back then. In any event, from the pictures that I've seen, and unfortunately they're all black and white pictures too, so we don't necessarily know like exactly what kind of green it was, but based on Dr. Dunton's notes, it was probably that Nile green that was really popular in the 30s. It's kind of like a sort of a dusty kind of pale green. And it's called Nile green, and it's a lovely picture, a lovely color. It's kind of a flat color, but I think it's lovely. In any event, again, it looked just like this. So this particular Delectable Mountains, this is what she says about it. The Delectable Mountains, an American quilt rich in tradition, got its name from John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. Now, you might remember Pilgrim's Progress, if you read Little Women, was like in the very opening chapter of Little Women, they received the little book, Pilgrim's Progress. I think each girl received it from their mother for Christmas. And so Paul Bunyan, John Bunyan, John Bunyan had no blue ox. So John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and this is what this quotation is. They went till they came to the Delectable Mountains. Behold the gardens and orchards, the vineyards and fountains of water. So that's the quote from Pilgrim's Progress, where the name of this quilt comes from. As Ruth Finley says in her book, Old Patchwork Quilts, in search of peace and plenty, the pilgrims of Plymouth first landed on these shores. For America came to mean gardens and fountains of water to the oppressed of all the world. It was a remarkably apt choice of name, the Delectable Mountains, for an American quilt pattern. So, that's kind of interesting. And oh Lord, we don't want to open like an immigration can of worms. But if you think about, in the past and people coming, immigrating to the East Coast, and imagine, there's a mountain chain all the way down sort of the back part of the East Coast. So, all of the East Coast states have got this coastal situation, but many of them on the western side of the state have mountains. So I suspect like this is what whoever the first person to make this quilt and or name it Delectable Mountains, like that's got to be what they were thinking. Um, as John Bunyan wrote in Pilgrim's Progress, like I think all of that comes together with this mindset. All guesses on my part. All we know is it came from John Bunyan. And so you've got all these instructions here. um, these are full size pattern pieces. Yeah, this pattern results in a square quilt. So just, the fact it's made out of squares, half square triangles, it's gotta be square unless you add an extra row, and you can do that. You could add extra rows down here. I think I've seen one that does that. It kind of just takes this row here and just kind of builds it up on either end to make the quilt like bed length. But anyway, I was thinking as I was flipping through to this today and taking the pictures of the pages, I was like, you know what? I have not done any like really traditional piecing in a while. And I thought maybe I will give this a try. Now, I can imagine myself hand piecing an entire Delectable Mountains quilt, but I thought I could try some blocks and just see, how hard this is. I need to find modern instructions though, because I mean, this is literally like cut 10 1/4 inch square. Let's see, cut 10 1/4 inch square from white. Seam allowance included for center. So that's this. It's one square. And then you cut 7 triangles of white and 6 of red for each mountain. And so I'm guessing those are the little doodads, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, okay. So that's talking about the little jaggedy parts of the mountains. You piece 84 mountains. From white, cut 24 large rectangles. Or I'm sorry, large triangles and 60 triangles. These instructions are so weird. So yes, I need to find some modern instructions for piecing Delectable Mountains. Hey, Marianne. So yeah. And this says photograph courtesy of the Newark Museum. I'm pretty sure this is red and white. It doesn't say. I don't think it says in here, but I'm pretty sure this one is red and white. And I have, I think, 2 Newark like catalogs, like exhibit catalogs. One is in black and white, and I think one has this quilt in color. And I think that's why I know it's red and white, if I remember correctly. So, Delectable Mountains. You guys are gonna have to peer pressure me, because I'll sit here and say, "Oh, hey, I'm gonna make this," and then it filters down. It filters down to the back burner and other things like, but I think this one would be kind of fun to make out of like a print, like I don't know. And maybe even because of the way the borders, I mean, essentially these are like, this is like a medallion here in the center, and it's essentially just borders going out, right? So I kind of like was thinking like maybe each border could be, the mountain itself could be different, like a different print, but you'd keep the white part or the, whatever that, you'd keep that a single color. So we'll see. But you guys are welcome to peer pressure me until I say stop. All right. So moving on to the next one. So this is called modern quilting. So that last one, Delectable Mountains, was old time quilting. This one is modern quilting. And this says, as you like it quilt. And this is essentially just like putting together a whole bunch of squares. It says this versatile quilt pattern can be adapted to suit the preferences of the quilt maker. Strips of pieced squares of all colors and prints are made as long as you like them. In the sketch below, strips of 7 squares are used. Start with 1 square, add a strip of 3 squares, then a strip of 5 squares, then as many strips of 7 squares as you like. So it's like what they're talking about is sort of building from here. So 1, 3, 5, 7, and then you just keep going with 7. When you have a piece the size you want, add a strip of plain fabric the same size to complete the block. The points along the edges need to be trimmed off to square up the sides. So that's what they're talking about. So you trim that off and then you join plain fabric there. When setting these blocks together, the strips may be arranged to go crosswise, up and down, or diagonally. Border quilting designs, such as the one given on this page, fit well into the plain sections of the blocks. Quilting in the squares may be done on the seams or through the centers. The only pattern piece needed is a square of any size you wish. A 1-inch square, 2-inch square, even a 4-inch square. And they give this square. And then this is the quilting pattern. I thought this was kind of pretty, and you can imagine. I mean, look at this is what they're saying the quilt would look like. So you could have these two pieces here, these two spaces here, and you could put these things. I feel like you could like put them and like reverse them, so you'd have, one pointing that direction, and then you'd flip the next one, and it's saying reverse pattern on this fold. So that's what it's telling you to do. But you could see kind of like making this like long pointy piece and then having those reflect, sort of reflect each other. Yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. I like it. That's modern quilting, y'all. Okay, and I accidentally cut off the top of the page, but this is a collector's reprint, The Secret Drawer. And it says contributed by Mabel Bueller of Hutchinson, Kansas. Clipped from the Kansas City Star 1930. Now, at first I thought, based on this handwriting, I thought this might be Ruby Short McKim, but it is not. She lettered her illustrations for quilt stuff similarly. Like she had this, it was her handwriting or her lettering, and it looks very similar to this, but this is not. You can see that there's somebody else. Ferlina Foland. I don't know. So you got anybody familiar with this one? These are spools, right? And then you've just got this piece in the middle. So Secret Drawer. So let me read the bottom here. This is from Kansas City Star. Clip and save. Does this old-time name, The Secret Drawer, bring to memory the old family story about the long-lost will, which would have brought great wealth to the family, but was placed in the secret drawer and forgotten? Or perhaps it takes us... How many of us have found an old will in the secret drawer of a desk? Oh my gosh, the false bottom. Along with all that Confederate money. Or perhaps it takes us back to those childhood days when Mother would get it out from its hiding place and, as a reward of merit, allow us to play with all the pretty old-fashioned pieces of jewelry it contained. At any rate, it is a charming pattern and offers several interesting developments. The 4 patches surrounding the center square, which may be of plainer figured fabric, should be pieced first. The small square in this patch may be of another color, if desired. Any pretty color combination can be used. The finished block is 12 inches square, 4 being shown above. Okay, so this is the block right here. So you've almost got it's almost like an octagon look to it, even though it's these spools that make this. It's interesting. Yeah, so these little pieces just outside that make the spool shape, that's this. And then you've got the spool itself. I don't know, actually this might be the spool itself. Okay, so this is the top and bottom of the spool itself, and then also this shape. I think, right? Does that make sense, you guys? I think this is what I'm looking at. And then this here is the dark square, but also 4 light triangles. So that's these here, I think, right? I don't know. I'm kind of bad at figuring out some piecing sometimes. I mean, this is one of those ones that it doesn't really give a whole lot of information on how you do this. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Oh, Marianne, will I be making this? No, ma'am. I don't think I would ever make this one. It's lovely. I think it looks fun, but um yeah. Yeah. Well, I say never say never, but yeah, I can't see myself making this one. Delectable Mountains, yes, but put this one on the back burner. Although if anybody here wants it, I would happily copy this page for you and send it to you. Just let me know. Okay, this so this is a, let me see. This is a letter to the editor. That's what these are. And this is interesting. So she says, those having a letter in this column will receive a pre-cut plastic quilt pattern kit. Share with us your quilting news. So that's interesting. She's talking about like giving a gift, or prize for getting these letters. I don't know that I've seen that in later issues. So I'm wondering if they were offering a giveaway just to get people to write in so that they had content here. So she says, here's a picture of a most beautiful quilt. It was bought in an estate in Florida by a friend of mine. I offered her $50 more than she paid for it, but she will not sell. The spikes of berries are graduated and every one is stuffed. So that's these things she's talking about here. These little, it's a shame we don't have like a front on picture of this quilt. But you can see these, she's saying these are stuffed. These little fronds. The whole quilt is appliqued. At intersections of the strips are quilted pineapples. In fact, the whole pattern suggests pineapples and tastes of Hawaiian design. My friend claims it has to be at least 100 years old. This is 1971. The former owner died at age 82, and it was made by her grandmother. The quilting is so exquisite that we used a magnifying glass in order to count the stitches. And we found places where 14 stitches had been taken per inch. The pattern itself is lovely, but it was the quilting that overwhelmed me. Are you familiar with the pattern, or do you think it might be an original? The backing is homespun, and it was probably made of flax, so linen, a linen backing. Would you have any idea what this quilt is worth? I should add that the main colors in it are red, green, yellow, and white. So for the, let's see, red, green, white quilts are typically like mid 19th century. So she's about right with the date. Yeah, and so she gives her whole address. And then it just says information from readers would be appreciated, so people could write directly to this woman. I think it's a really cool looking quilt. I mean, you kind of got this, this star situation here, but I'm like, what are these little white strips in the star, and then you've got the center. So are they appliqued down in such a way that they're leaving a little strip of the backing in between them? It's so hard to tell. And then these, I would think that these are pieced, but maybe they're not. I don't know. And then this here, I'm definitely thinking these pineapple-y sort of things are appliqued, because they kind of look a little, you kind of see. And I'm thinking they're pineapples. They seem to be pineapples to me. Anyway, kind of a cool quilt. Really wish we could see the borders, because look at this. You see here along the edge, there is some undulating vines along the edge. Yeah, very interesting. Okay. Grandma's Corner. I cannot go without reading Theo Essen's Grandma's Corner. So let me find another picture to put up here for you. I'll put this up. This bird. It's a lovely blue jay. And I'll tell you more about this. This is interesting. We're going to get to this in a minute. But let's go ahead with Grandma's Corner. I'll let you look at the bird. Okay, so Grandma's Corner. And if you're new around here, Grandma's Corner by Theo Essen was a feature in Quilter's newsletter for quite some time. It was a little spotty throughout the 70s that she wrote this, but definitely there was like span of like late 70s to early to mid 80s that this column was in every single issue. Um, and I got that information from a friend, and she did not know enough about Theo Essen to really tell me much more. Quilter's Newsletter magazine, and I don't know when they published it, but there was a giant index that was published, and it'll tell you like what issues certain things are in. And so she looked up Theo Essen, and it gives like, every issue that Theo wrote this Grandma's Corner. Theo also wrote other articles for Quilter's Newsletter magazine. I just haven't run across one yet, but there were a number of them. So, all right. So Grandma's Corner by Theo Essen. Movies were few and television was unknown in my childhood. But Grandma's head was as full of stories as her quilts were of colorful pieces. Evenings, we would gather around the dining table to take advantage of the central light, the base burner glowing with cozy warmth. This was story time. One such story I have never forgotten. The story began way back when I was a child, Grandma began. The panic was on, and many family men left the East looking to the new Western frontier as a place to start anew. The get-rich-quick stories from the Pikes Peak area were tempting. My Uncle Jim was only one of the many who heard the siren call. Kind of what was the panic? I don't know. Is this like... I mean, there's the stock market, but I don't know. That seems like it's not long enough ago. Because I feel like Theo Essen was most likely an older woman at the time she was writing this. So, anyway. Aunt Martha and my girl cousin Millie went to live with Grandma Wilson, while Uncle Jim took my 7-year-old cousin Bob. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? 7-year-old boy to go on this wagon train. They joined a wagon train and headed for the territory, promising to send for Aunt Martha and Millie as soon as possible. So I'm wondering if this panic is like the Civil War. Because, there are people heading out before the Civil War, and then lots more people headed out after. Months passed, and only one letter came from Uncle Jim. The letter was brief, and discouragement oozed between the lines. Then there was a great big silence. It was almost 2 years before Aunt Martha could contact anyone who had even heard of Uncle Jim or remembered a young man with a small son. Oh, the word that finally did come back and had to be accepted, was that Uncle Jim had died of pneumonia the first winter, and some family, no one seemed to remember who, had taken the small boy in and had long since moved on. No one seemed to remember exactly where. Can you imagine this? Like, this is totally different than like what, nothing like this would happen today. Some random kid just, with random family members. For the most part, people would know where a child was unless they were, family kidnapping situation. Let's see. By this time, Grandma Wilson was too old and too ill to be left. Besides, Martha herself was frail, and it was all she could do to eke out a living for herself and Millie. It was as if the small boy had dropped into a chasm of oblivion. Aunt Martha and Millie never gave up hope that young Robert would be found. It was years later when Cousin Millie, now a young married woman, came west and settled on a cattle ranch in the eastern Colorado plains. One night, during a dreadful blizzard, a young itinerant cowboy rode into the ranch, half frozen and ill, to ask for work and shelter. By morning, the unkempt stranger was babbling with fever, and Millie and her husband cared for him for days before he became coherent. The stranger was shy and reluctant to talk about himself, but seemed grateful for the care given him. One day, when it was warm and sunny, Millie decided to launder some of the pitifully meager items in the stranger's bedroll. One of the items was a dirty, bedraggled, handmade quilt. After long soaking in a strong soap solution, the quilt began to show signs of respectability. Millie was aware of the beautiful handwork and stitchery. Suddenly, her hands began to tremble as she stared at blocks and design that were strangely familiar. On rubbery knees, she ran to her bedroom and pulled a quilt from a chest, a twin quilt that matched block for block, and even an embroidered signature in one corner with the stranger's quilt. Grandma loved to tell the story. In her inimitable style, it unfolded as a beautiful drama. But the happy ending was that the young stranger was truly Millie's long-lost brother, who was a lone and helpless child I'm sorry, who as a lone and helpless child had adopted his benefactor's name, almost forgetting his own. But somehow he could never bring himself to part with the quilt, his only link with an ever-dimming past. Oh my gosh, that's a good story. You often wonder, like, are these stories real? I think a number of them, I think, definitely were. You know, I mean, you could tell just based on the I guess what I would say, like the details seem like they were very, you know, real as recollections would be. But um, yeah, this one's a Reader's Digest tale for sure. Okay, so let's look at this. This is interesting. Now, in looking at it, my first glance, and I didn't look carefully, but my first glance was, oh, this looks like a paper piecing pattern, right? And I don't mean English paper piecing. I mean foundation piecing, where you have a foundation and you know, you're stitching and flipping on top of this foundation. But let me read you how to make this quilt, because that is not what this is. So what it tells you, and this is the second one. This is a series. The first block, I guess, would have been in the September issue, and then it goes on. So it says, transfer the pattern to the center of a 13-inch square of light blue percale as directed in issue 23, so the previous issue. The applique and embroidery. So this is applique. For applique, use bright colors of bias tape or a cotton cloth cut on the bias. The finished width of the bias should be 1/2 inch. Cut the bias to fit the sections marked on the bird. Fold and smooth the bias in place. Pin and baste. Applique with tiny running or blind stitches. The color of each section of the bird is marked on the pattern. Finish the block with embroidery using 3-strand embroidery cotton as follows. So feet are black, the ruff, which I guess is like this part here, this little, the black part. That's a black buttonhole stitch. Eye and beak, black satin stitch. Brown, branches are brown square chain, and evergreen bells or green outline, and brown straight stitches. And it says the numbers on the bird indicate the order in which the bias sections should be appliqued. Do number 1 first, number 2 second, and so on. Have you ever seen a thing like this? You know, I haven't. You know, like usually like an applique is you're gonna get like large shapes. And you know, I mean, these are when, you know, as I looked at these are definitely like could be done with bias tape, like even packaged to bias tape, 1/2 inch bias tape. I have a ton of old bias tape. I thought maybe I would try to make some of these birds and see how this goes. I suspect it would infuriate me. And yeah, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, for instance, this right here on its back. So you're putting 1 and 2 down first. This piece on its back, I mean, you think like if this is like the edge, the cut edge of the bias, you'd have to cut it like at this pretty sharp angle and then tuck that under. It seems to me like this should have gone down earlier, and then you could cover the edge of this up with these other pieces. And you kind of do, I guess. 13 and 14 come after this one. It's just really odd. I've just never seen anything. I mean, have you guys seen anything like this? This is just not something that I'm familiar with. You know, and it does. Let's see. It says by Vera Grutter, Grutter. So, you know, I don't know if this is just her specific technique or if this was a technique that was out there and she created this bird quilt. I don't know. So, would it work paper pieced? You know, I'm terrible at paper piecing, but I think it could. I think you would have to cut, well, I think you've got an issue right in here with this back piece here, because of the way that comes in. You know, it's like, unless you cut this out, I don't know. I don't know, Marianne. It's one of those like, yes, maybe, I don't know. A person who is good at creating those paper foundation pieced blocks could probably look at this and figure it out. I think it probably is doable with me. Maybe it would need a few little little tweaks to it. But yeah, this is just, again, something unusual. If anybody wants to try their hand at it, let me know. I'm sure I have more than a blue jay. I didn't look. I'm not sure if I have the September. I'm pretty sure I do have the September. This is October. Pretty sure I do have the September of this one. So I might be able to get that bird, and then whatever happens beyond that to find the other birds. So, all right. Let's see. I think this was. I don't think there was anything to read here. Yeah, this is just kind of general stuff. And then this is fun. This was any quilt made of hexagon patches can be embellished with embroidery. And so they give these little like snowflake type embellishments. Although this one, I could see this one doing this one like in maybe like green to make it look like little trees or something. I don't know. That's really cute. And then the very last page here is the classified section. And I know we've looked at the classified sections before, and you know, this still has, this is 71. So she's still getting, Bunny Lehman is still getting these ads for stuff that later issues don't get into. So you've got lose weight, collecting recipes, the $200 red velvet cake. I don't know what that is. The scripture cake. 11 spices Southern fried chicken. My favorite though is, where did it go? Hawaiian ham salad. I can only imagine what's in that. And look, it says Hawaiian loaf or Hawaiian diamonds. I cannot even imagine what that is. Hawaiian ham salad. Another one in here was interesting. Look at this. Confederate flag quilt. That one did not surprise me when I saw it. You know, today the Confederate flag is a symbol that most Americans would, you know, recognize as being racist. It was part of, I think, multiple states' state flags, and I don't know if there's maybe one that still has it. I can't remember, but you know, I grew up in a very southern, slightly rural community, and I saw lots of Confederate flags growing up. And you know, back then it was just like, you know, it's like the redneck flag. It didn't have that connotation that it has today. So, you know, again, this isn't something that surprises me, but it kind of does, because I'm like, 1971, like, who really cares? Like, I guess the old stars and bars were still interesting to people then. I don't know. And then it says, you know, this is Contemporary Quilts, Memphis, Tennessee, illustrated catalog. So this was like literally a company that's creating, you know, creating patterns. So kind of interesting. All right. Well, that is that issue of Quilter's Newsletter magazine, or Quilter's Newsletter. It's not magazine yet, even though the little byline right here, the little byline, or what do you call it? The masthead, I guess, is this Quilter's Newsletter, and then this little, it's not a byline, but whatever this little line is called, it does say the magazine for quilt lovers. And then at some point it becomes Quilter's Newsletter magazine. And they were very irritated if you called it Quilter's Newsletter at that point, because it was a magazine. All right. Are you guys ready to finish this? Oh, I think it's been a really good book thus far, although it's so slim. You know, we've learned a few things. And a few things that I guess were different, or not different, but sort of added to our knowledge from Mavis Fitzrandolph's book, which was much longer. Okay, so I will leave this up as I read, but after this, we've got lots of pictures to look at. Okay. So as a reminder, we are reading English Quilting Old and New by Elizabeth Hake, written in 1937, or published in 1937. She wrote it in 36. So we are on chapter 4, Quilting Today and Tomorrow. Only 2 pages here. Chapter 4, Quilting Today and Tomorrow. All hand needlework from having formed an integral part of normal routine in every English household, has dwindled into a pastime for those who have leisure to pursue it, and that it should resume its former status is neither to be expected nor desired, as the essence of its merit is that it is handwork, emphasis she has added, and therefore unsuited for competition with work that is better performed by machinery. Um, that as a hobby, again emphasis, needlework of every kind is increasing today, is noticeable in the growing number of exhibitors whose work is to be seen at most contemporary exhibitions of any importance. In this connection, quilting has lately received much attention, and the fascination of this type of work, experienced by those who have mastered its technique, encourages the hope that the revival is genuine and likely to be lasting. The standard attained in quilting at its best today is as high as ever in its history. This claim is born out of the very lovely examples of quilts, cushions, and so forth to be seen in the photographs, which we'll look at in a minute. And yeah, this is interesting because this is 1936, and she's talking about a quilt revival. Now, here in the US, we had had a quilt revival in the 19 teens. And by the 1930s, we're in a depression. And, quilts often were a matter of necessity, homemade quilts. But as we come out of there, um, quilt making declines very much in the US. Lot few quilts were made towards the end of the 30s and into the 40s because of World War II. So it's interesting to me here that she's talking about this quilt revival. 1936. Wadded quilting has essentially more practical qualities than corded or linen quilting, and is certainly the more popular of the two today. But the very fine examples of the latter shown at recent exhibitions of modern needlework contribute worthily to the history of this type of work, which it is hoped may continue to thrive. There are, moreover, indications that leisure, which for so long has been the privilege of the few, is to be extended by legislation to within the grasp of many women and girls employed in industrial centers, and it is not unlikely to be accompanied by a desire to devote some of it to the practice of creative forms of handiwork. So this is interesting. So basically, she's saying that, so these women working in factories, I'm assuming industrial centers, as she calls them, and she's hinting at this legislation. So I'm thinking like this must be at a time when they're kind of stopping that like work 18 hours a day in a factory situation, where I'm guessing, these factory laws are starting to create a better lifestyle for women and girls that are working in these, they're working class women. So that she's suggesting these women will have more time because they're not being forced to work round the clock, I guess. In the distressed areas of Wales and the north of England, many homes have been kept intact by the gallant efforts of the very skillful quilting members of families whose normal breadwinners have suffered several recent years of unemployment. And although it is difficult to foresee how general a revival of English quilting as a home craft may become, there are signs of awakening interest in many parts of the country. In rural districts where tradition lingers and where mechanized pleasures are still rare and not always uncritically appreciated, there is a distinct movement towards attempting to revive what appeals to most women as one of the thrifty and enduring home industries. Through the comprehensive machinery of women's institutes in most villages in the British Isles, and the less mature but growing number of townswomen's guilds, they have all kinds of guilds over, the millennia in England. So, growing number of townswomen's guilds, quilting in the Welsh and northern traditions is being taught and learned with diligence and with outstandingly successful results by women of varying degrees of leisure and every shade of competence and taste, who realize that through them this fine national heritage can be carried on and developed. It is impossible to emphasize too strongly the desirability of this development being continued on traditional lines. Rightfully, there should be no shortcut methods in this particular branch of needlework. The worker should plan her designs with templates as described in chapters 2 and 3, and not have recourse to untraditional ready-made patterns stamped by transfers on muslin. One disadvantage of these being that the muslin forms the back layer of material and has to be covered with a lining. The quilting therefore only shows on one side of the finished work. Quilting by outlining the design of a patterned chintz or crouton, sometimes seen today, can hardly be regarded as legitimate descendant of the parent craft and may be considered but a makeshift substitute for the traditional method. So I think basically what she's talking about is just like taking a big piece of pattern fabric and then just quilting around the design. As in the past, so today, quilting inherently provides infinite scope for truly creative pleasure in design and execution. The owner of the frame that we looked at the other day, quilting frame, says that it would have been destroyed or might have perished from lack of use, left to rot in a woodshed, had not her mother, on her deathbed, asked to have it brought to her in order that she might once more see the frame on which she had produced work that had given her as much pleasure as anything she had experienced in the course of her earthly activities. I kind of like this because you know what? On my deathbed, I will be asking to see my quilt. Your children, your spouse, your loved ones, your friends, who cares about them? Bring me the quilting frame so that I can remember quilting. That's what I want to do on my deathbed. In its suitability for manufacture within the home, the quilt possesses a peculiar merit. Although exposed for a full century to the competition of machinery, under the depressing influence of which most of the fireside crafts have all but vanished, the making of quilts as a home industry in America has never languished. As a homemaker, the quilt is a most capable tool lying ready at the hand of every woman. The selection of design, the care in piecing, the patience in quilting all make for feminine contentment and domestic happiness. And that is the end. And that last piece where it starts off in its suitability for manufacture within the home, that is a quote from Marie Webster from Quilts, Their Story, and How to Make Them. I wouldn't have recognized it without without the footnote, but yeah, I mean, I do kind of remember this, that her, her talking about that. So that said, let us look here at all of these pictures. We actually have a lot of pictures. So here she shows quilting, the quilting patterns. So she's saying no template needed for the diamond pattern. And I think she's already described the lines are either marked by a chalked string or drawn with a needle. So again, like if you have a straight edge, you can do that needle, compress the fabric with the end of a needle, or you can like snap a chalk line. And I suspect a lot of people, especially if their husbands or maybe sons, did some type of carpentry type work and may have had that as a tool. They probably use that because it's fast to just snap and you've got a line, and then move it, snap, you got a line. The template for the shell pattern is here. And when I first looked at it, I was like, huh? But then I see, okay, if you set it down, you want the bottom of it to line up with that little point that's being created by the two, like the row beneath it. And then I think these little notches should then line up with the hump, the top part of the scallop. And then that way you line them up and they don't get wonky. And then you have the wine glass pattern, which is essentially a circle. And they call it a wine glass pattern, but I mean teacup pattern, coffee mug pattern, it's just however big you want that motif to be, you just find something round, a bowl, a glass, whatever. Next, we've got some borders. Look at these. So this one on the top is a North Devon border, and then they've enlarged it right here. And it's actually pretty simple. It's just this little sprig, And then you've got like a double line around the triangle. But when it's all together, it looks, you know, pretty sophisticated. Next here we have a cable border. And this one is cool because this is giving you how this should line up. And I guess I've never quilted a cable border like this, but using this, you know, this football or eye shape with these little notches in it. Now you see how it would go together, and you see how, you know, if you've done your work here to kind of get these sections sort of mapped out, I guess. Then you just, you know, you're setting it down and going down the length of the border. And then this one's pretty simple. This is a wave border. And so you're just essentially kind of starting with this big triangle, and then you're just graduating down by like probably 1/4 of an inch or half an inch, and just kind of echoing this triangle. So now we have these little motifs. And she's even showing like these are the pieces you'd cut to draw around. And I kind of wonder a little bit if you could just use these. It just says some characteristic floral motifs and their templates. I mean, I kind of feel like you could almost, if you like applique, needle turn, you could kind of make these appliques, or I guess use them as quilting patterns. All right, so let's look at the quilts. So this one, which looks very busy, but I like it. This says Devon quilt, circa 1840. Patchwork made from a dressmaker's piece bag. So, and this is, let's see, I think this is the quilt that's on it says see frontispiece. So I think this is the quilt that's on the front of the book. It's not 100% clear to me, but I think so. I don't know. Because this looks like it's got a lot of dark pieces in it, but this, I mean, you guys seen the front of the book enough times to know it's a very light colored quilt on the front. So I don't know. Okay, this. So here on the left, oh my goodness, look at that quilting. Ah, gorgeous. So here on the left, we have a Devon quilt. Circa 1750, this. Green silk center, green and white silk patchwork border. Okay. Oh my gosh. Wow. So, and these look like, this looks like a pinwheel almost. I can't quite tell, but like right here you can see, looks like a pinwheel. But I can't quite tell if that's what's happening all the way across. Ugh. But oh my gosh, you guys, look at this quilting. Oh, I do have to say, having quilted on silk, if it's not a satin weave, if it's like because satin weaves are very wiggly, but if this is like a you know, like a dupioni or just like an even weave, and it's so thin and lightweight, and it is so wonderful to quilt, I have to say. Everybody should, at some point in their life, quilt something on silk, even if it's just a small piece, because it's pretty delightful. And then this one over here, zoom out a little bit. That one is, it just says a Somerset quilt, 1807, white linen on both sides. And then she also mentions in here, these are examples of fan corners and geometrical centers. So I guess this is what she means, these fans. And then this, you know, the geometry going on in here. Now, Somerset and Devon are in England, but some of this stuff very much reminds me of what you see in Welsh quilting, like these sort of wiggly lines, and you know, fans definitely are a thing. This one's really cool though because it's pretty simple. This is like a grid, but it looks like it's pretty. Uh-oh. Marianne said sound drop off. Can you guys hear me okay? Looks like everything on my end just looks normal. So I'm going to keep one eyeball on the chat if anybody else is having a problem. Okay. Might be you, Marianne. Which, if you can't hear me, you obviously can't hear me. Okay. Oh. Let her know. It's her. um, so yeah, I can't remember what I was saying, but these are fantastic. I love them. Remember the petticoats. Look at these. So you can see petticoats like this in the US in museums because women here made them as well in the early days. So this just says a silk quilted petticoat, Devon, circa 1789. Note the naturalistic tendency in design. So this is the same petticoat, just one is showing you the full thing, and then this one is the picture's tilted to get, so you can see all of this detail. Gosh, look at this. I mean, this is just really lovely. Kind of different than the ones that I've seen from here in the States, but I mean, the ones I've seen were, either in the books we've looked at or a very specific researcher has done a lot of work on a particular set of petticoats from a particular area. So I can't say I've seen every petticoat in the US, but this seems like it's pretty like specific maybe to this area. But you've got, I guess these kind of look like pomegranates, and then you've got this like really interesting feather design. Like it's very like steep. I guess the angle is very steep. And then you have these multi-petaled flowers, that kind of heart-shaped flower thing, Rosa Sharon flower. And then this is interesting, this scallopiness. And like, look how it does this like point and then point. That's interesting too. It seems to me like this is probably just this, designed perhaps by the quilter or by someone. So it's, oh no, Marianne. I hope you can hear us now. So, yeah, this is a lovely thing. And I guess, so these swoopy pieces, I guess when it kind of falls in its gathers, I'm guessing that's maybe why, I don't know. Very cool. We don't wear things like this anymore. I could definitely use a thing like this right about now. It is cold here, even though I just took off my jacket. I was sweating a little, but I will be cold again shortly. Okay, this, let's see, part of a Somerset quilt. So this looks like it's both quilt. Both of these pictures are the same quilt. Part of a Somerset quilt, 1857, in patchwork, backed with white linen. One of 7 made by one family during a single winter. Note the quilted circle of hearts between 2 circles of leaves. So yeah, you can see leaves, hearts. Isn't that lovely? And so I'm guessing this is the back of it. And what harsh lighting they must have had on this. Because this is a white linen. So very harsh light and shadows were on this quilt. But look how fun this is on the front. And I'm trying to see, is this definitely, yeah, this is definitely the back. Yeah. It's interesting that, this looks like English paper piecing here, the hexagons, and how interesting it is that they quilted. I mean, if you've done English paper piecing, it's a little fussy with the layers, right? You typically, when I've seen people quilt English paper piecing, they're usually just doing like not necessarily stitch in the ditch, but like that, where you come in just like a little, like not even a quarter of an inch onto the inside of the shape, because your ditch, your seam line is maybe a little fragile with English paper piecing because it's, it's pieces of paper or pieces of fabric wrapped around paper that are butted up against each other. So you don't really have that overlapping seam kind of situation. So you've got some probably thickness here. And so for them to have put this, they always, and I feel like she's even mentioned it in here, talking about, always marking and quilting from the front. I could see this being marked and quilted from the back because I feel like it would be so much easier to deal with this on the front than to deal with marking this and trying to navigate all of those little pieces. Yeah. Marianne could use a snowsuit. Yeah, same. Yeah, it's supposed to get really cold here tonight, like way below freezing. So you guys are probably already dealing with that because I know you two are in zones that are a little bit more susceptible to weather. See, Robin says, while it's a little chilly here, we're having early spring. Supposed to be 50 today. No precipitation in the forecast for at least a week. We're glad you're having a nice winter, Robin, because it is winter here. I just hope we don't have precipitation because I could deal with cold, but it's like once it starts, snow and ice, well, all bets are off. This, oh my goodness, look at this. This says Herefordshire quilt, early 19th century. Bands of mauve chintz on white linen. So this must be the chintz. Interesting that they have used the word mauve, because if we remember correctly, if you are hanging out with me and Jill and you're reading this book, the book called Mauve, you would know that William Perkin invented mauvine, the mauve dye, much later than the early 19th century. I can tell you that. So it's interesting that they've used that word mauve chintz. So I'm guessing it was kind of a lavendery chintz, right? Coincidence? Of course. We run into that all the time with quilting, You read enough of these books, you look enough of these books, you find like all of this stuff. But gosh, look at this. Look at all of these like motifs and things. Again, some of these things I'm seeing from like having taken a class in Welsh quilting. This says, what, Herefordshire? Yeah, Herefordshire. I don't know geographically exactly where that is, but some of these motifs have like these little rainbow shapes, the leaves, and these little spiral swirly dealios. Very Welsh. At least according to today, and the Welsh quilting that I've taken classes in. So, but wow, there's just a lot going on there. Beautiful. Okay. So this one here at the top. Oh my goodness, Lord, look at this. Oh, so much. Oh, so much detail. So this says Dorset quilt circa 1815. Patchwork side in large pieces of chintz, white linen back, floral center. So this is the back. And then this is the front. Wow. I would love to see this in color. To know what this looks like in color. It's such a bummer that didn't have... So Marianne asked, was this quilting an individual or team effort, do you think? I'm thinking, I guess based on what we read in Mavis Fitzsimmons' book, Mavis Fitz-Randolph's book, and then I guess kind of what she's alluded to here, I really think a lot of these quilts could definitely be like one person or maybe a family. I do know that there was, I do notice you just said your ears pricked up at mauve. Yeah, I don't know. Without being able to see these like in like really close up. Although, in looking at the quilting itself, it's, I mean, best as you can tell without actually like getting in detail, it looks pretty consistent. So if it was being made in groups, it was probably most definitely by master quilters or like very, very skilled quilters. So I don't know. I think that's a good question. Um, Probably could go either way. Probably split on how many of these quilts were made by one person and how many took a couple of people at least. Okay, this I think is a whole cloth quilt because look at that. Let's see. This says patchwork side of a Devon quilt, 18th century. This says an example of the use of remnants of old embroidery instead of odd pieces. In this case, the embroidery, an exquisite red and blue silk on linen, is considerably older than the quilt. So this is 18th century, so 1700s. And I'm guessing this has been pieced together. Maybe. I mean, I'm kind of looking here. Like this looks like it's been pieced here. Kind of hard to tell. I mean, I don't know, you guys. It's kind of hard to tell what's happening here. I mean, I could see some pieced lines. There's a gap there. So that's definitely pieced. So yeah, I guess this is just sort of they've cobbled together all of this embroidery. Not my guess is, it doesn't say, it just says old embroidery. My guess is these were either drapery or more likely like bed drapery, right? So like either the curtains or the spread or both. Um, we run into these things here in the US too, where they'd, for whatever reason, they'd take something down. Maybe it was, depending on the wealth of the person, it might be like, oh, that's last decade's quilt, or embroidered screen or embroidered hanging. Like, let's make a quilt out of it. So I suspect that's what's going on here. Okay. Next up. This is cool. So this says Somerset quilt, circa 1875. Patchwork in chintz and turkey red, white linen back. The quilting pattern follows the patchwork. Okay, so yeah. So you can see, it's hard to see, but you kind of got these lozenge sort of, it's kind of like a diamond that's been stretched and it's got, straight sides. And then you've got these six, I'm sorry, are these six? 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, six pointed star. And then some of this other stuff, you've got definitely some fan shaped quilting. Okay, so then let's look at the back of it. Yeah, so you can see those stars. You can see these lozenge shapes. You can really see these swaggy sort of. But it's interesting. The scallops are pointing inward. You'd think that you'd make them pointing outward. So. And I'm thinking that this picture must be, yeah, this picture must be cut off because you can see these is it like kind of 4 lines that make this one sort of border, and then you've got that scallopy swaggy thing going on, but it's cut off over here. So interesting quilt though, right? You're seeing cubes in the center. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what this shape creates. Depending, like if you made this, that's the fundamentals of the tumbling blocks. Is it a 60-degree angle diamond, I think. And so when you put those together, you could, depending on the colors you use, you can get tumbling blocks, or you can just get this simple star pattern. It's one of those, I don't know, I kind of like it because it's one of those that's kind of got that like optical illusion. You kind of have to, like, as soon as you see a tumbling block in it, you're like, you can't unsee it. Okay, the next one is a very striking. Look at this. I really like this. This circle situation in the middle is so different, right? As a medallion. I'm wondering if it was because they had scraps or they just thought this looked fun. You know, I mean, it's just these 4 big blocks. And these are 8-pointed stars, so that's like a slightly narrower, maybe the 8-pointed stars, the 60-degree. I don't know. That involves math that I can't do in my head at the moment. But look how the color use on the borders, how it almost looks like there's sort of this like woven sort of stripiness, almost like a maypole, right? And then you've got these diamonds. Very interesting. I like that. And then, oh, so wait a minute. I didn't read the info about this one. So this one is our Herefordshire quilt, early 19th century, patchwork and colored prints. And then this one just says Cornish quilt, 1837. So Cornwall, if I remember correctly, so Wales is kind of like up towards the northwest. Cornwall, I think, is like southeast. So you kind of can't get much farther away from like the northern part of England and Wales. So this is in that southern eastern part of England. So you've got something very different going on here, I think, than what particularly like what Mavis Fitz-Randolph showed with those, you know, those Welsh and northern England quilts. But look at this quilting here on the sides. Look at that. It's like these spirally things. And then you've kind of got these like sort of petal shapes. You know, I'm just, that looks very modern, you know? And, but look at all these different, the hexagons I think are different sizes. Like these are the bigger ones. These are medium sized and then these are small. Have you ever seen that? Multiple sizes of hexagons. And then they're just separated by these borders. Very ingenious. See my big thumb? I loved this one. I think this quilt is really pretty. Devon quilt, early 19th century, applique patchwork in red and green prints on white linen. But I mean, look at the quilting in there. You got this really pretty quilting. And then these pieces. I would guess that this is pieced and then all the other stuff is appliqued, but who knows? People did a lot of weird piecing. They pieced diamonds, they pieced triangles. I'm sorry, appliqued. They appliqued diamonds, they appliqued triangles. Yeah, it's interesting, and I guess sometimes it's just a matter of what their skill was like. Like, you know, I'm a terrible piecer. I will definitely applique anytime I can, but I feel like when you get down to like triangles, especially ones that have like very narrow points, and diamonds, you're better off machine, you know, using a machine. Just my opinion, but in any event, I like this one. Wish I could see it in color. This one's interesting. You might recognize this pattern because I'm not saying it's this quilt, but this very pattern is on the dust jacket of Florence Pito's book. I think it's just is it antique quilting, antique quilts. This is the pattern that's on the dust jacket. So this one, it says Somerset quilt circa 1850, patchwork side in turkey red and white, Peter and Paul pattern. So in other words, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. And it's because these two colors alternate in the pattern to create the whole. I think it's interesting here. They've done these like little corners, like little cornerstone and capstone kind of things. Very fun. Okay, here's some more incredible quilting. Top one is a Somerset quilt with a border of wave and clover leaf. So I'm assuming this right here is the clover leaf. And this is the wave, but then you've also got some curvy stuff going on. And then this, I'm assuming that maybe this is considered a wave as well. And then this down here, I think is the same thing. Yeah, this is the floral center of that quilt. And it looks to me like an urn. I don't know if you guys can see that very well, but it looks like it's an urn. And then you've got flowers coming up here. But then now you have all of this, like, I think that's shell. I think that's a shell pattern. And then you've got sort of these cable units coming in. Very creative, right? So Marianne is saying a pineapple. Yeah, it kind of has that vibe too. But I think it's a or a vase. I really do. I think it's a vase. True, it says pineapple too. Yeah, it definitely has that vibe for sure. And you definitely with the, like this crosshatch and then kind of this stuff. Okay. This, I thought this was fun because look at this dense quilting in here. And then you have no quilting on these orange peel shapes. So they pop out. And I'm curious to know if there's any stuffing. Let's see. This says Devon quilt on white linen, late 19th century, made in 3 weeks. Corners showing angles of borders, center showing wine glass pattern. Note close stitching used as contrast. So yeah, I don't think there's any stuffing going on here. I think it's just the fact that these pieces are not quilted at all that make them, stand out in relief. And I mean, what kind of dense quilting you have to do in here to get that stuff to stand out in relief? I can tell you, it's a lot of dense quilting. But to the point, this is the wine glass pattern. You're just overlapping these circles, and then you end up with the orange peels. And then this looks like it's just the same thing, like pulled out. But my gosh, look at this. You guys, look at all of this. I think it's as dense as quilting, in the US at the same time period, but the motifs are so different. We loved the feather wreaths and a lot of floral motifs, and this is so much more geometric. Here's those spirals, and then this like little it's like a tree, kind of a tree in there. I think we're in we got a few more. I might have to show a few of these later. So is this the same quilt? Yeah, so this is a Devon quilt, 1825, in patchwork and white linen. Note the quilted floral center and wine glass filling. So I guess we have to go up here and look. Wine glass filling. I wonder if she's meaning that. I don't see any like major circle-y kind of overlap here. I wonder if I'm just missing it. I mean, you kind of have like some circle-y stuff here, but it's got other shapes so superimposed on top, so it's hard to tell. Okay, moving right along. I know, 3 weeks, right? So I think to answer your question, Marianne, in 3 weeks, either the woman who quilted that was an absolute like speed demon, maybe she was the Flash's mother, but I suspect something that detailed she would have had to have help. That had to have been a group situation. Okay, this is just what we just looked at. I guess I had 2 of those. For some reason, that one was supposed to be, we already looked at that. Well, that's weird. Some of these are popping in out of order. Okay. Just more of the same. I mean, look at this. Look at this. So gorgeous. I think this is what we just looked at. I must have taken these pictures multiple times. And a leather thimble, right? So this is a Devon quilt circa 1850, an example of West Country temperament in design. Typical floral center. So, I mean, it's just more of the same. And this looks like to be sort of like an abstract vase with the flowers coming out. Oh, but look at these things. These almost look like shells. And you've got, I guess, the wine glass quilting, but then it's got, like, they're bisected to make leaves. Oh, glorious. So this says, let's see, portion of Wiltshire corded quilt. Okay. And then this is a fragment of Wiltshire quilting. 2 pieces of linen quilted in back stitch, no cord inserted. So I'm guessing, so this one at the top, yeah, so I'm assuming the one at the top, photographed as a transparency. I think what that means is they hung it in front of a window. I think those are called, it's called a lumograph or something like that. And I always, when I heard the term, I thought, oh, this must be some interesting technology. They shine a light through it and take a picture. That's a lumograph. I think that's what it's called. In any event, that's how that you can see all of this so darkly, is because it's hung up. But what happens here with this type of quilting is basically a channel has been quilted. A little channel is quilted, and then you thread a needle with this, it's kind of like a, it's almost like, it's a cross between like a roving and a cotton like cord. I took a class in it and I couldn't get the material here in the US. They sell it like in France and the UK. I couldn't get it here in time when I took the class. So I just used that yarn. It's a cotton yarn that you use for making dishcloths. I think it's like peaches and cream or something. I used that and it worked fine. It worked. I think it's a little bit more like stiff and firm than what the actual material is. But anyway, you thread it on a kind of a big needle. You use the tip of your needle, kind of make a hole. Like you're not poking a hole. You're sort of spreading your the fibers out, and then you thread the needle through there. And like you could go pretty quick, like, in a straightaway, but these curved things take forever. And I could tell you the small piece I did was enough. Like I didn't want to do anymore. It was really pretty. It was interesting, but it's very tedious. So it makes sense why this one maybe never got done. Because this has got some insanity going on. And then this situation here where these overlap, I don't know how you would do that, beyond having to do the cording in segments. Like you couldn't have a continuous piece of cording that would go all the way around these round shapes. You'd have to stop at the intersections because the intersections would have been stitched through. So, I think there are ways to do this. Like, I guess you could cord one through and then stitch. I don't know. I think it's says to me that you'd have to cut your cording into pieces to fit this. And then any areas, I'm going to presume that this might be stuffed, perhaps. That would not be cording, but rather like I guess you could tease apart this roving yarn type stuff cording. But my assumption is they would just use some batting and you just poke it in there. And you could you kind of use the cord and just keep stuffing it in there until it's filled the space. All right, coming to focus you. I think my computer is saying, getting a little tired here, Cake. Oh my goodness. So what does this say? This is an English corded quilt, early 18th century, white linen, photographed as a transparency. So, oh my gosh. Oh lordy, look at that. Now, you might notice here with the exception of this, you don't have a lot of overlapping lines other than a few of these areas, just because, like I just said, you have to segment your cording. You can't just keep, you can only go for a little stretch if these things overlap. So, but you can see everything else is kind of, you know, its own little line. It doesn't cross. It's very interesting to look at these because I really wasn't aware that corded quilting was a thing in England or the UK. Because again, when I took this class, it was specifically French, out of Provence. There are artists doing it today, and there is a long history there too. Um, but Elizabeth Haig also mentioned that it could have come out of Italy. So that was interesting to me as well. Oh gosh, more of it. Oh lordy, look at this. So this, oh my goodness, look at this. So you can see here how this is done. The cord is going like this. Hopefully you can see my cursor. I don't think it's crossing over itself. I think it is just coming and touching here to make it look like that's an entire shape, but it rather is one half of the shapes. Oh my goodness, look at that. This is so amazing. Like a ribbon wrapped around. Oh, gorgeous. This one, it says Devon quilt, an example of West Country. Oh no, wait a minute. I'm sorry. That was the previous one. um, no, this is a center of a Leicestershire corded quilt, 18th century. So 1700s, man. Looks like she's got a lot of corded quilts in here. This next one I think is corded too, isn't it? Oh, no, no. So this says Old Welsh quilt. Portion of border showing church window motif. And then a geometrical center with sea wave filling. So this is the church window. I think that's what this is. Sort of like a Gothic church. And then this up here has this wavy quilting in it. And then this is interesting. These are kind of like sort of paisley shaped. They almost look like fan blades, kind of. That is a motif you'll see in Pennsylvania German stuff and in quilts coming out of Southeast Pennsylvania. And so you start to wonder, like, some of these influences, you know, where they come from. So Marianne, so if you lay down on a corded quilt, is the pattern? Yes, I would say yes. And yeah, I think that's like kind of, in fact, I think Elizabeth Haig actually said this, that these quilts were made for show. You know, they were made as like a bedspread that you'd take away. You wouldn't lay down on it. You wouldn't use it. You know, it's not warm because that cording, you know, it's compressed in there. It's not fluffy. It doesn't hold air the way that, you know, like a regular quilt or comforter, you know, the batting fluffed up a little bit holds warm air. This doesn't, because it's all compressed and it's flat, and also uncomfortable. So indeed, but would that not be fun? Lay down and get yourself like a like, you know, a cool quilted face pattern. Sorry about that. I have to remember not to touch my earbuds. Okay. Oh my gosh, you guys, look at this. Look at this. So this says part of a Portuguese coverlet, corded quilting, 17th century. And this is out of the Victoria and Albert. So wow, that is interesting. So now we've got the Portuguese getting involved with corded quilting. So I personally know French is legitimately, absolutely 100% corded quilting comes out of France. But we also have the Portuguese and potentially the Italians, and of course the English doing this. So I would say corded quilting must have been quite popular. Oh, wow. Oh my goodness. Get this. We're in the home stretch, guys. Just a couple more. So this is a long, skinny thing. So this says, oh my goodness. Okay, this is interesting. An Indian quilt made by Himalayan women. Circa 1922, white linen, backstitched, interlined with semel cotton, Semal. I'm not familiar with that term, semel cotton. Note the relationship to English quilting patterns. So 1922, I think that this would definitely have been influenced by the English quilting patterns. So interesting though, made by Himalayan women. Yeah, that's so pretty. But I mean, yeah, you have the wine glass. These are fun. These circle things, they look almost like, I don't know, some type of palm kind of thing. And it's a long, narrow quilt, so it must have been to fit in some sort of specific space. I mean, maybe like a small, narrow bed. Pretty cool. Okay, so the final pictures here. We have, so this is a quilter at work, bird's eye view showing quilting frame setup and worker in position. So she referenced this, early on when she was talking about the stitching. And here you can see that tape that's wrapped around. She called these the swords. And then each of those little flat edges are attached, like they're pinned to the quilt to keep the quilt taut on the sides. And then it looks like, it doesn't look like the quilt is rolled here. I guess somehow she's got it pinned just taut between, because you can see a little bit of that, it's like a little bit of like tape or fabric that's been like hammered or stapled to the edges of these long pieces. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on here, but it doesn't look like the quilt is wrapped around either of those. So, and then down here we have carding the wool. And so those are the paddles typically used. You can use them for cotton or for wool, and it's just aligning the fibers and getting the like the knots out, and you could kind of sometimes it'll kind of brush some debris out. So Druid has some intel for us. So the red silk cotton tree, Bombyx ceiba, also called summel, is a large deciduous tropical tree known for its striking red flowers that bloom in winter and spring on bare branches. Its spiny trunk and fluffy cotton-like fibers in its seed pods are used for stuffing. Native to Asia, its ornamental provides edible flowers and medicinal bark and adapts to varied soils, thriving in sunny, well-drained spots in tropical and subtropical regions. So it says Asia, but it makes perfect sense that, well, I mean, India is technically part of Asia, but it makes sense that it would thrive in India. So that's interesting. That kind of reminds me of like kapok. I don't know if you guys are familiar with kapok as a stuffing, and it's a thing that, has like I'm assuming it's a tree or bush of some sort, but it has like a pod that opens up and it's got fluffy stuff inside. Milkweed's another one. So yeah, interesting. So carding the wool. And then last but not least, oh, we have a couple more pictures. So this is copy of the Porth Group of Welsh Quilters, 1935, of a Somerset quilt made in 1818. Note floral design and center. So another stunningly, crazily beautiful thing. But it's a copy. I love that they copied this other quilt. And it says the Porth Group. So this would definitely be multiple hands in this one. But again, and like, we can't necessarily see the quality of the stitching, but when you look at it from here, you see that it is very consistent. So, my guess would be these are very talented quilters that worked as a group on something like this. These are fun. Just a couple of cushions. This says Northumbrian quilted cushions. Very pretty. And last couple. So these are a modern Welsh quilt and a modern Northumbrian quilt. So we would, I guess, assume, 1930s. That's really pretty. I like that. And this one too. Oh, look at the paisleys. The paisley is definitely a Welsh motif. The little heart shot flowers, these hearts, very Welsh. I think I like this one though, because although this is very involved in the center, you've got this like big pool of just that grid quilting. And it gives your eye a place to rest, and I think really makes that border And that center just like even more stunning. Sometimes simplicity is good. I'm a more is more person, but sometimes simplicity is good. And look at this. So I've got some more cushions and pillows. Oh, okay, so this is a cot quilt. I think maybe a crib quilt. And this is a cushion. Oh, look at that. I'm wondering if this has got some trapunto. This has got some stuffing in it to make it pop out. And then look at this lovely. Oh, I love a little jacket like that. It says dressing jacket, Northumberland in Shanghai silk. Very pretty. And then our last pictures are right here. And just more gorgeousness. I feel like we've seen this before. I feel like that was in Mavis Fitzrandolph's book. Are you guys remembering that? Something very similar to this, I remember, because I remember it being interesting that it was these like kind of feathers, but they're in this diamondy kind of pattern. And then a Welsh quilt full of spirals. You couldn't get more Welsh than that. Let's see, let me read you the last little bit here. So this is a typical Welsh pattern by Porth Group, Rhondda Valley. And then this one up here is a Durham feather pattern. The feathers used in the center are perhaps the best known North Country pattern, feather wreath and border. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that Mavis Fitzrandolph showed that one. So Marianne says very talented. Absolutely. I mean, my gosh. You know, this kind of quilting today, you know, goes to the major quilt shows. You know, this kind of stuff is like, this is the stuff you see at like Quilt National and those kind of exhibits. So master quilting for sure. All right. So we went over a little today, but that's okay. So I hope to see you guys this weekend if you're available on Saturday, as I said at the top. Jill and I are doing Stitch and Glitch. It's on YouTube, 2 p.m. Eastern time. The Quilt Nerding channel, if you've never been there before. You can also find it on Instagram. So go follow if you don't already follow on YouTube and Instagram, because then you'll get, Jill is so good about putting the schedule up. I'm very bad, but Jill puts the schedule up so you know what's happening. You know, and we're hoping, like I said, we're 15 days into 2026 and it's been a rough year so far. So we're thinking it's a perfect time to get together on Saturday and just, you know, have some fun and just be silly like we always are and just have a good time. So I hope you'll join us. But if you're not available, understand. I'll be back on Monday as usual. And yeah. So, oh, thanks, Druid. Yeah, grab a beer and relax. Absolutely. Jill and I generally stay sober for it, but you are not required to. So, all right, guys. I will see you soon. Have a great weekend. Mwah! Bye.